Greetings, class. Today we're going to address the question, how do attribution errors influence conflict? And so I'll start with a bit of an explanation. Attribution error, or the fundamental attribution error, is the tendency for people to underemphasize situational explanations for an individual's observed behavior while overemphasizing dispositional and personality-based explanations for their behavior. Or, in other words, this describes how, when judging others' actions, we tend to give too much causal weight to their character and not enough to the context. And when evaluating our own actions, we give the weight to the context and not a consideration of our character. And what this really says is that when we make mistakes, we tend to say, it wasn't my fault, right? It was the circumstances, it was the situation, it was these details that caused me to produce this outcome. I didn't mean to do it, it wasn't my fault, I had no choice. While we don't give other people the opportunity, or we don't see the actions that others take as having that same quality of having been subject to their conditions, but rather subject to their character. So if somebody, I use this example a lot, but if somebody in traffic cuts you off, you tend to blame that on the person. You say that that person did that because they're a bad driver. You may even generalize it to all Toyota drivers or all male drivers or all whatever, right? Whatever demographic category, they are bad drivers, and because you see that behavior frequently. Whereas if you cut somebody off, you are much more likely to say, oh, I didn't see that person, or it wasn't my fault, I was trying to avoid the pothole, or I was in a hurry and I just wasn't paying enough attention. I'm a good driver, right? The ultimate conclusion of the cutting the person off is that I'm still a good driver. It just wasn't my fault this time, or these are my excuses. But when the other person cuts you off, you don't see it as like that person's probably a good driver, but just having a bad day. Um, so in conflict, if we ascribe behaviors to someone's character, there's lots of different impacts that will have on our ability to try to reach settlements with them. Right? If you see what somebody did as being a byproduct of an aspect of their character, right? Like if your house is burglarized and you see that the person who broke in is by definition a bad person by virtue of having broken the law, then the chances that it makes sense. It's logical extension. Why would you try to go out of your way to help a bad person, especially when that bad person has done something to harm you? Um, and I don't have a really good parallel, right? You probably haven't broken into someone's home. So the thing I'm going to say is that there might be some limitations to compassion here. There actually may not be any good reasons to think that there's anything beneficial about that person whatsoever. They've done something to harm a person, right? Breaking into someone's house is very serious. Like that's a big crime for a big reason, right? We need to be able to have confidence that things will work. Okay, but so if we attribute the behavior to a quality of the character versus if we attribute the behavior to a quality of the context or the environment. So, what's the difference, right? Think of the hypothetical person who's broken into your house. How old is that person? I don't know. But just imagine something, right? Imagine it's a teenager, right? Imagine it's a 15-year-old. Right? If we assume that the teenager is breaking into people's houses because it's a bad person, flawed character, unlikely to do good in this world, we're going to respond to that conflict, this issue of justice, differently than if we think, well, okay, so 15-year-olds are products of their environments. What are the behaviors? What are the things that have led this 15-year-old to a life of crime? If we start thinking that there's a causal relationship of context, right? Again, this is the crucial detail here, is that attribution error means that we omit the thinking about context in evaluating the actions of others. So if we look to the context of the 15-year-old's life, we might see indications or the connections that have been made to this individual's life of crime, or the beginnings to this individual's life of crime. Forgetting about whether or not it's a mistake, right? Forgetting about the part where the person should have known the difference between right and wrong. If we see that, for example, a 15-year-old has broken into somebody's house to steal stuff because they want to sell it, and the stuff that they want to sell is because they want to finance something. If what the person's trying to finance, say, is they're trying to pay for a drug habit, right? They're addicted. Then we might consider the ability about whether or not an intervention of like a drug rehabilitation program might be good for this kid to keep them from going down this pathway of behaviors that are both self-destructive and community destructive and society destructive, right? If we consider context, we can reach a different conclusion or a different response to the problematic behavior. If the person's bad, we just assume that no matter what happens, this person is going to continue to break into people's homes and try to steal stuff. That might be the truth for some of the strongest addictions, right? Some of our current opiates are extremely addictive, and the chances of somebody kicking it might be much more elevated than some of the drugs of the past. But I don't know if that means it's inevitable, right? And I don't know if it's unlikely, that means we still shouldn't try. But those are other considerations to make. So in conflict, if we think that people do things as a product of their context, then we can try to do things to address the context, right? Maybe you have a conflict that involves respect or anger, or some of those capacities in which people relay what they think they should do. A person who fights may have learned that that's what they're supposed to do, right? It might be socially constructed, it might be culturally constructed. But if what you're trying to do or hoping to do is change a behavior, get people to see more mutually satisfying solutions to disputes, trying to help the person understand that while they might have learned that fighting is the way to address problems, right, we can change the context. We can give the person the ability to see that there are other ways to deal with that, right? The attribution error says young men like this will always fight. There's nothing we can do about it. Without seeing that maybe that's actually a learned behavior, and that one of the things that we can try to do is encourage unlearning that behavior. Right? Is this something that a person's born with? Is it instinctual, or is it a learned behavior? Attribution error says that it's something that's essential to the individual, and that really just might not be the case. And so when we assume that there are features of a person's character that are shaping the way that they relate to others in society, and in specific, if it's the way that we relate to them in conflict because we don't expect anything different from them, we're actually limiting our own ability to be creative in reaching mutually beneficial solutions. If we want to think outside of the box and think about what are all the possibilities here, that might actually help us reach the most desirable outcomes. And so frequently have to get past this attribution error in order to see that others might be just as capable of doing positive things as we are ourselves. And sometimes we have to be able to get other people to see past what they're attributing to us, right? That's the flip side of this. We've been treating it the whole time as though it's you needing to see somebody else differently. But sometimes what we need is for others to see us the way we see ourselves, as being fully autonomous beings that are capable of free will, free choice, and determining uh, the best possible strategies for success, and that we can be part of agreements that relate to a whole range in flexibility. So, on the one hand, what we need to do is be able to see other individuals as being a product of their context. But sometimes what we actually need to do is have others see ourselves as being a part of our context. And part of that is by sharing our stories. When we deal with people, sometimes actually not holding back and sharing, this is who I am and this is how I got to be this way, but I'm willing to work on doing things differently if the need is demanded. So thank you for following on this attribution error, and I'll see you on the next one.